I hope you brought snacks. Get ready to ride this timeline. October 1962. For 13 days, the Cold War stops being an idea and becomes a clock. The scary part is not just Kennedy versus Khrushchev. It is the system that is packed with people who can trigger the next step: pilots, ship captains, radar crews, and commanders who see only a small piece of the picture. When you stack fear on top of nuclear weapons, you do not need a master plan to get disaster. You just need one bad assumption that nobody can walk back fast enough. Here's the setup in plain terms. Castro takes power in Cuba. Cuba moves towards the Soviet Union, and the U.S. relationship with Cuba collapses. The Bay of Pigs in 1961 fails, and that failure matters because it convinces Castro another attempt is coming, and it convinces Khrushchev that Cuba is both vulnerable and strategically useful. Khrushchev makes a gamble, secretly deploys Soviet nuclear missiles to Cuba. He is trying to protect Cuba, raise Soviet leverage, and change the balance before Washington can stop it. Now the fuse lights. On October 14th, a U-2 spy plane photographs missile sites under construction in Cuba. Within days, Kennedy is looking at evidence that forces action. He forms XCOM, his top crisis group, and we know that what those debates sounded like because the meetings were recorded and later published in transcript form. Some advisors push airstrikes, others push an invasion. Kennedy's fear is that speed becomes its own trap, because once you start bombing, you cannot control where the Soviets answer back, and Berlin is always sitting there like a second front. By the end of this chunk, lock this in, the US has proof. The missiles are being built, and Kennedy is staring at options where every path has a real chance of escalation. So now the question becomes, how do you apply pressure without firing the first shot? Now the US has found the missiles, and Kennedy has to pick a move that does not instantly light the match. Kennedy chooses a naval quarantine, basically a blockade, but he avoids that word because it sounds like an act of war. On October 22nd, he tells the public what the US found and announces the quarantine. This is the moment the crisis goes global. US forces shift into higher readiness. Soviet ships are moving. The ocean becomes a trigger zone. Because if ships collide, if a warning shot goes wrong, if somebody panics, leaders can get dragged into an escalation ladder they did not choose. While diplomats exchange messages, the construction in Cuba continues. That is why the pressure feels like it tightens each day. Washington watches the sites. Moscow watches the quarantine line. Cuba expects invasion. And inside each government, pride and fear compete with caution. The crisis is not just about pressing a button. It is about misreading intentions. In crisis studies, that is the nightmare. When each side thinks it is reacting defensively, while the other side reads it as a preparation to strike. Now bring the urgency up. The longer the missiles stay, the more the US military pushes for action, and the more likely it is to become that some local incident forces Kennedy's hand. That is what makes the middle days so dangerous. The system is loaded. Everybody is tense. Everyone is interpreting signals. And then the calendar hits October 27th. That is the day historians keep circling back to because multiple near misses stack on top of each other. Black Saturday, October 27th, 1962. If you ever wondered what close looks like, it looks like this. Several different points of failure happening in the same 24 hours. First, a U-2 is shot down over Cuba and the pilot is killed. That matters because it creates intense pressure to retaliate. In a crisis, once people die, leaders feel boxed in by credibility, by the military, and by the fear that doing nothing invites more aggression. Second, there is an air navigation incident where a U-2 strays into Soviet airspace. That kind of mistake is terrifying in a high-alert environment. Radar sees an intruder. Fighters scramble. A pilot makes a split decision call. This is how accidental war starts. Third, and this is the one that will make your stomach drop, the underwater crisis. The U.S. anti-submarine forces pressure Soviet submarines near the quarantine line using signaling depth charges. The submarine crews lived reality as isolation, heat, exhaustion, and not knowing whether war has already started. Later documentation and testimony collected and contextualized by the National Security Archive shows that at least one Soviet submarine, B-59, carried a nuclear torpedo, and this episode became a near catastrophe story for a reason. Archipov's role is highlighted in his literature as a brake on escalation inside the submarine's decision chain. Now zoom back to the leadership level, because the diplomatic channel is also unstable. Khrushchev sends messages that do not match his tone. One leaning towards a deal based on U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba, and another adding the issue of U.S. Jupiter missiles in Turkey. The solution that emerges is essentially public and private. Publicly, the U.S. emphasizes the non-invasion pledge. Privately, back-channel communications supports removing the Jupiters later. That off-ramp is part of how both sides save face while getting away from the cliff. Then, October 28th, Khrushchev announces the missiles will be removed. The immediate crisis eases, but the lesson stays sharp. The world did not survive because the system was perfect. It survived because key people slowed down at the worst moments, and because a few decisions did not go the wrong way. We were not one dramatic button press away. We were one accident away. The Cuban Missile Crisis is proof that history can hang on restraint, not bravado. Kennedy understood something that most people forget. In a nuclear crisis, the strongest move is the one that slows the clock down. He kept his nerve, chose an off-ramp, and the world got another day. This is History Unbuttoned, and I hope you had fun.
As always, these sources guided the making of this video. I highly suggest that you take the time to read or research a few of them to understand the deeper nuances that a short video cannot explain.